This is a story about a choice that changes not a single fate, but the course of an entire planet. About a creature, small and nearly defenseless, that found itself among giants with fangs longer than a hand, among monsters whose jaws crushed bone, and among predators who would have needed only a fraction of a second to erase it from the world. This is not about strength. This is about how sometimes the weakest creature carries within it the future of all others. Imagine a world where power is taken not by those you expect, where a bird with an axe-beak claims the Tyrannosaurus's throne, and in murky water, a woolly half-crocodile waits for you, whose great-grandchildren will one day become blue whales, where a 4-ton sloth rises on its hind legs and sweeps saber-toothed cats away with a single swipe of its claw, and 6 pigs using pack tactics bring down a 20-ton titan. For 60 million years, the planet cycled through options, shuffled forms, sent one giant after another onto the stage, and each of them believed it would be the one to last forever. Each of them was wrong. Time chose neither the strongest nor the most fearsome. It chose those who could see a little further than the rest, above the grass, above the horizon, above their own fear. And somewhere in the shadow of African acacia trees, there already sat a creature barely taller than a child, without armor, without fangs, without claws. In its palm lay an ordinary river stone, and hidden inside that stone was already the answer that would rewrite the rules of the earth. Would you have understood it if you had been there? Could you have seen the future not in the most fearsome beast, and not in the largest body, but in the small, quiet observer with an ordinary stone in its palm? What matters more in the long game, sharp fangs, or the ability to see what no one else can see yet? And where is the line between weakness and that one chance the world grants once every 60 million years? Listen, that is what this story is about. 66 million years ago, a light brighter than 1,000 suns blazed above the horizon, and the planet ceased to exist in the form it had known for the previous 165 million years. The asteroid struck with such force that the Earth's crust shuddered. The sky was choked with dust for years. Forests burned to cinders, seas boiled, food chains snapped one after another. The dinosaurs that had ruled every continent, every swamp, and every coastal shallows vanished, not over a geological epoch, but in a matter of mere thousands of years. The surface became a silent, ashen wasteland. But life knows how to wait where death seems absolute. From deep burrows in stone crevices, where the warmth of bodies had survived the nuclear winter, the first survivors began to emerge. Creatures the size of a large rat, covered in thick fur, with the sharp teeth of insectivores and wary eyes accustomed to seeing in the dark. These were mammals, pressed for ages to the very bottom of the food hierarchy and forced to hide from those who had just vanished. Before them now lay an emptied world, vast, silent, as though cleared specifically for a new experiment by nature. I'm Dimitri, and this is the channel Era Before Us. Today, the story of how, in 60 million years, a handful of furry survivors broke every pattern of evolution and became masters of the planet. Let's begin with the Paleocene. The world came alive slowly and reluctantly. Mists crept over scorched valleys. Young forests had not yet reached their height, and the air smelled of ash and damp greenery. Mammals, finding themselves in unfamiliar space, began to grow, cautiously, as if unable to believe their luck. In the branches of young trees hid tiny primates, purgatorious, creatures no larger than a squirrel, whose grasping paws and sharp vision already carried within them the first sketch of what we would one day become. But the throne left empty by the Tyrannosauruses did not stay empty for long, and it was claimed by someone no one would have expected to see there. In a world where the most terrifying predators had suddenly vanished, power was taken by those who had survived the entire Mesozoic in the treetops. Birds. It would seem that mammals were finally free, but a new nightmare with a beak instead of teeth was already waiting for them. Meet Gastornis, a living reminder that feathers do not mean defenselessness. Imagine a creature the height of a human and weighing 150 kilograms, stripped of wings for flight, but armed with the legs of a true sprinter and a head whose very design inspired terror. Its beak was not a delicate tool for catching insects, but a massive bone axe with a high cutting edge that crushed skulls and turtle shells with the same casual ease with which a person cracks nuts. Early morning, the edge of a Paleocene forest. Milky fog drifts across the grass, muffling every sound. A small herd of ungulates, none larger than a dog, grazes on young shoots, keeping close together. One of them, the most careless, steps a little apart toward the edge of the fern thicket, and from that thicket a massive silhouette moves silently forward. Gastornis fixes the prey with a cold, unquestioning gaze, and a moment of taut silence explodes into a lightning charge. The ground shudders beneath each of its steps. The ungulate tries to dodge and weave, but is a fraction of a second too slow. A blow of the beak from above, driven by the full force of the neck muscles, and the prey's skull cracks under the pressure of the living press. For the small mammals of the Paleocene, this was a lesson without words. The dinosaurs were gone, but their feathered heirs still held the throat of this land. While Gastornis ruled the forests, the planet's climate was shifting toward warmth, and by the Eocene, which spanned the period from 56 to 34 million years ago, the Earth had become a giant greenhouse. Tropical forests climbed all the way to the Arctic. The humidity was such that the air seemed tangible, and there was food enough for all. For evolution, this was an ideal time of experimentation, and it missed no opportunity. Had you found yourself there, the world would have seemed like an endless dream. Giant trees, lianas, unknown flowers, and the unceasing cries of animals in the canopy. In the trees of these primordial jungles there appeared Darwinius, also known as Ida, a small primate with opposable fingers and enormous eyes like two nighttime searchlights. Its hands and grip already bore a striking resemblance to our own. Leaping from branch to branch in search of insects and ripe fruit, it still had no inkling that its descendants would one day descend from the trees and begin to look not only around them, but forward, into the future. And on the ground, in the shadow of those same trees, lurked something before which all other predators would have seemed like amateurs. Meet Andrewsarchus, the largest land-dwelling carnivorous mammal in all the history of life on land. 4 meters from nose to tail, a skull nearly a meter long made entirely of dense muscle and bone, and limbs ending not in claws but in hooves. Andrewsarchus was a biological paradox, not a graceful sprinter like a cheetah, heavy, slow, but gifted with jaws of such crushing power that it could easily snap the bones of prey the size of a cow. Imagine a watering hole in the height of the Eocene heat. The air shimmers above scorched earth, smelling of mud and damp greenery. A herd of Uintatherium wades slowly to the water. 3-ton giants with 6 horns on their snouts and long tusks, once regarded as living fortress towers. They look invulnerable. But from the dense shadow of the riverside thicket, Andrewsarchus watches them patiently. It is in no hurry, its body is too massive for a chase, and its weapons are not fast legs, but waiting and timing. That moment arrives when one young male Uintatherium becomes mired in the bank mud, losing both speed and maneuverability. Andrewsarchus steps out of the shadow unhurriedly, pressing its monstrous weight into the earth with each step. The Uintatherium tosses its head, thrusts out its horns, but the swamp holds it more firmly than any shackle. Instead of a graceful leap, the predator pushes straight through, using its full mass as a battering ram, and topples the prey onto its side. Then its nearly meter-long head closes on the Uintatherium's neck, and the silence is torn apart by a dry, terrible crack of shattering cervical vertebrae. The struggle ends faster than the mind can comprehend. The role of theropods in the ecosystem had officially passed to the mammals. But while some mammals were mastering the art of hunting on land, Others made a decision that seems insane even millions of years later. They turned their backs on dry land and walked back into the water. Consider this. Life had spent hundreds of millions of years climbing out of the ocean, learning to breathe air and walk on four limbs. And then, a complete about-face. Why would warm, furry creatures with lungs return to the cold abyss? The answer is simple. After the death of the former masters of the seas, vast pastures and fish-rich bays were left without owners, and mammals had no intention of missing this buffet. Meet Ambulocetus, the walking whale, whose name describes it more precisely than any other description. A 3-meter creature that resembled an impossible cross between an otter and a crocodile. The body covered in thick fur, short, powerful limbs with webbed membranes between the toes, and a muzzle elongated into a long-toothed snout. Ambulocetus still breathed air, and in all likelihood came ashore to sleep, but it hunted exclusively in the water. Imagine a murky mangrove swamp, where water the color of strong tea hides everything deeper than 10 centimeters. A small ungulate steps onto the bank to drink. It looks around, listens to the rustling in the undergrowth, checks the air for foreign scents, and finds no threat, because the threat is hidden beneath the glassy surface of the water. An explosion of spray shatters the silence. Ambulocetus launches out of the water, its jaws clamping onto the ungulate's muzzle in a death grip. The prey kicks with its hooves, tries to break free, but the predator simply backs away, methodically dragging its catch into the deep. A few seconds of desperate struggle, a chain of air bubbles rises to the surface, and the swamp sinks back into silence. For evolution, there is no delete button, only change and reuse. Hard to believe, but this very fur-covered half-crocodile with teeth is the direct ancestor of the blue whale. Millions of years will pass, its limbs will become flippers, the fur will disappear, and the body will swell to the size of a ship. But the entire journey began here, with the first risky step back into the water. The warmth of the Eocene was ending, and the Oligocene was approaching, an era when the planet began to cool in earnest. Antarctica covered itself under a shell of ice. Dense jungles gave way to open savannas, and the world acquired new rules of survival. In this new chaos, there flourished the entelodont, the hell pig, and this nickname it had fully earned. 2 meters at the shoulder, a head with bony protrusions on the cheekbones, powerful jaws like those of a hyena, tiny eyes burning with fury, and, most importantly, the ability to work as a pack. All of this made it a formidable participant in the Oligocene's brutal contests. But even in this harsh world, there were gods of a sort. Meet Indricotherium, also known as Paraceratherium, the largest land mammal in all the history of the Earth. 5 meters at the shoulder alone, a neck as long as a giraffe's, a body weighing 20 tons. Next to it, a modern African elephant would look like an adolescent, and adult Indricotherium were so enormous that they had virtually no natural enemies. It seemed as though mass itself guaranteed immortality. But nature always finds a way to level the odds, especially when it has 6 vicious pigs with pack tactics in reserve. The Oligocene savanna, height of the dry season. The air rings with heat, dust grinds between the teeth, every step is an effort. An old male Indricotherium, exhausted by thirst, begins to fall behind the herd. Its movements have slowed, its breathing grown heavy. From the tall, scorched grass, entelodonts move silently toward it. 6 2-meter monsters with faces that look like they walked out of a nightmare, and jaws capable of grinding bone to dust. They do not rush into a frontal attack. That would be suicide. They have a different strategy: teamwork. The pack surrounds the giant, keeping a safe distance. The moment Indricotherium turns away, one of the entelodonts makes a lightning feint, tears a chunk of flesh from the giant's leg, and immediately springs back. Indricotherium tries to spin around, to strike with its massive leg, but it is too slow, and another hell pig is already gnawing into its flank from the other side. the tactic of 1,000 cuts. Hour after hour, the pack methodically wears down the prey, granting it not a single second of rest. Dust mingles with the smell of blood. The giant's head drops lower and lower, and at last 20 tons of living weight crash into the dust, shaking the earth. The pack's triumphant squealing echoes across the savanna. In this new world, tactics, patience, and coordinated action defeated sheer mass. Size matters, but intelligence and teamwork proved to be weapons of an entirely different order. The world was becoming faster, quieter, and incomparably more deadly. In place of the slow giants came the masters of invisibility. Meet Eocene, a creature that could not yet be called a cat in the modern sense, but already carried all the features of the future saber-toothed. The size of a small leopard, muscular and flexible, with two long, serrated fangs designed not for prolonged struggle, but for a single, precise strike. Eocene did not chase prey across open terrain. It dissolved into the dry grass and waited until the prey itself came within reach. It was precisely this predator that played an unexpected role in the fate of our distant ancestors. The forests that had served primates as home and fortress for millions of years were steadily retreating under the advance of expanding savannas. To survive, it was necessary to venture into open space, where tall, golden grass concealed a predator at arm's length. On four limbs, a primate's world was limited to just the nearest meters around it, and this was catastrophically too little. Imagine a group of early primates carefully making their way along the edge of the savanna in search of fruit trees. The wind carries an unfamiliar scent, and somewhere very close, barely audible, a dry branch snaps. Every instinct screams of danger, but the tall grass reliably hides the threat from sight. In this critical moment, one of our distant ancestors does something that will change the course of history forever. It straightens up, rises on its hind legs, balances, and stretches upward with all its strength, and its gaze rises above the swaying sea of grass for the first time. There, some tens of meters away, it sees barely perceptible movement, a tawny shape in the cold glint of saber-like fangs. The ambush of Eocene is exposed. One piercing cry, and the entire group instantly leaps into the nearest tree. That day, the predator went away empty-handed, but this accidental gesture, when the primate stood upright simply to see the enemy a little sooner, became the spark from which, millions of years later, the flame of human civilization would ignite. Free hands and a gaze directed above the horizon proved more effective than any claws. By the end of the Oligocene, the world had transformed beyond recognition. In 40 million years, mammals had traveled from creatures the size of a mouse to 20-ton titans, from frightened burrowers to masters of land, ocean depths, and the nighttime sky. Bats had long been patrolling the darkness, snatching insects in flight. Cetaceans were exploring the deepest ocean trenches. The first primates sat in the shade of acacia trees with sticks in their hands, still not understanding that they were holding the prototype of a future weapon. The Paleogene demonstrated one essential truth: mammals are the most adaptable form of life the Earth has ever known. Where dinosaurs required hundreds of millions of years to change their form, their successors needed only a few dozen to rewrite the rules of the game, journeying from creatures the size of a mouse to 20-ton titans. But the climate did not stop. Savannas expanded, covering Africa, Eurasia, both Americas. Herds, migrations, complex social structures. The world increasingly resembled an arena where victory goes not to the one who is strongest today, but to the one who knows how to play the long game. And somewhere on the edge of the African savannas, in the shadow of acacia trees, the first primates were rising more and more cautiously upright to peer above the tall grass and spot the predator before it could creep close. Late evening, the African savanna, the sun fading in the sky, the air cooling. At the base of a tree sits a small, ape-like creature, clasping a stick in its hands. Playing with it, not understanding that it is holding the prototype of a future weapon and tool. Around it lies a world of saber-toothed predators and giant beasts. But this clumsy bipedal observer will one day become the most dangerous predator on the planet. The Paleogene ends. Ahead lies the Neogene, and its first challenge will be unexpected. Not fangs, not claws, but grass. The planet continued to cool, and where not long ago the evergreen jungles had rustled, there now swayed an endless sea of grass. Grass, a quiet revolutionary without teeth or claws, yet one that had defeated more species than any predator. At first glance it seems easy prey, soft, juicy, docile. But this is a deception. Its leaves are saturated with microscopic crystals of silica, turning every blade into a biological abrasive. Grass ground teeth to dust, condemning the unprepared to slow starvation. The Neogene dictated cruel, new rules. The savanna is an open arena where it is no longer possible to hide in dense undergrowth. And to survive, you must either turn your jaws into millstones, capable of grinding glassy greenery for hours, or transform your body into a perfect biological engine ready for an endless marathon across scorching plains. 20 million years ago, the plains became an endless stadium where losing a race meant instant death. Meet Merychippus, one of the key ancestors of the modern horse, and the embodiment of the Neogene's engineering ingenuity. Its teeth had grown tall and dense, capable of grinding silica-rich fodder for decades without noticeable wear. But its greatest achievement was in its legs. The lateral toes began to atrophy, yielding to a single, powerful central hoof. And this anatomical shift turned Merychippus into the savanna's first professional marathon runner, capable of racing across hard ground for hours without tiring. Where the perfect runner appears, evolution inevitably creates the perfect pursuer. From the shadow of sparse trees, Machairodus watched the herd, not merely a cat, but one of the first true saber-toothed tigers in history. Nearly 3 meters in length, 200 kilograms of solid muscle, and 20-centimeter saber fangs designed not for chewing, but for a single, lethal strike. Machairodus understood perfectly that in a marathon it would lose to Merychippus. Its strategy was built on the surgical precision of an ambush. A plain scorched by the sun, the air trembling with heat. The herd of Merychippus nervously raises its heads, catching the smell of dust from the wrong direction. The wind blows toward them, concealing the enemy's presence. Machairodus has frozen just tens of meters away, blended into the color of the dry grass to the point of invisibility. A short, explosive burst, and the predator is at the center of the herd. Powerful front paws pin the stallion to the ground, and in the next instant, 20-centimeter fangs enter precisely into the arteries of the neck. No prolonged struggle, only the prey's quiet rattle and the smell of blood. The herd races away, and the predator sets about its meal. While cats and horses played out this evolutionary duel on the northern plains, our ancestors in Africa continued their quiet experiment. They still seemed weak and defenseless, but they had already mastered the key skill of the Neogene. They knew how to wait. They observed these battles from hiding and learned to understand the rules by which this new, merciless land lived. And while in the north, cats and horses honed their skills, South America remained a lost world, cut off from the other continents by ocean. There were no saber-toothed cats, no wolves, no bears. In this isolation, the predator's throne was claimed by those long since displaced elsewhere in the world by the toothed mammals, birds. While on other continents, birds escape from mammals by fleeing into the clouds, here, in blissful isolation, they turn back time, forsaking the sky to once again become two-legged masters of the land. Meet Andrewsarchus, the terror bird, a 2-meter athlete with a runner's legs and a head the size of a horse's, fitted with a massive horned beak with a sharp hook at the end. Not a feeding tool, but a genuine weapon of war. In South America, Andrewsarchus simply had no worthy competition. For millions of years, it was the absolute monarch. knowing no enemies capable of challenging it. A perfect, solitary killer in a world that stood still. Everything changed 3 million years ago when the tectonic plates converged and the Isthmus of Panama rose from beneath the water, a narrow strip of land that became a bridge between two worlds. Across this bridge from the north poured legions of new predators, saber-toothed cats, wolves, bears, and all of them carried something that forest raccoons had not the slightest concept of: pack discipline. This was not merely a collision of species, but a war between two philosophies of survival. The terror bird had for ages relied on the absolute power of a single lunge and beak strike. The northern newcomers applied cold calculation, endurance, and pack intelligence. Where the southern monarch relied on the brute force of the solitary hunter, the northern hunter used coordination and patience. The old rules broke down. The feathered tyrant, accustomed to being the sole sovereign, lost the war of systems. Even the most powerful axe-beak is helpless against a pack that knows no fear and does not retreat. The southern fortress fell, proving, in evolution the winner is not the most fearsome, but the one who can adapt to a new, more complex reality. While on the American continents, feathered empires were crumbling. In Africa, our ancestors continued their path. They were weaker than the saber-toothed cat and smaller than the terror bird, but they were already mastering that very weapon which had undone Forrest Racco's: mutual aid and the ability to act as a single whole. Finding themselves in the open savanna, they trusted their lives to two legs, not yet with the proud, upright bearing of modern humans, but with a slightly awkward gait and hands that still remembered the grip of strong branches. But the spine had already issued a challenge to gravity. Rising nearly to full height, these creatures gained not only a view above the tall grass, but something priceless: free hands. While the entire world around them was growing fangs and armor, they received the chance to pick up the first tool in history, and this choice would ultimately prove more dangerous than any claws. The Neogene was approaching its finale. The climate was growing harsher, the droughts longer, but nature, as though deciding to stage a farewell parade of giants before the onset of the Ice Age, brought the last monsters onto the arena. Onto the plains strode Arctodus, the short-faced bear, the largest terrestrial predator of its era. About a ton of living weight, 4 meters tall on its hind legs, and capable of speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour. This was not a bear in the familiar sense, a long-legged athlete and master of open spaces, before which even wolf packs yielded. In river floodplains and forest thickets roamed Megatherium, a giant sloth weighing 4 tons, beneath whose thick hide were bundled muscles denser than rope, and bones that matched steel beams in strength. The stifling midday of the Paleocene. The river carries its murky waters slowly, the air heavy with the smell of damp grass and nearby danger. A young Megatherium grazes at the bank. A group of Smilodons, the legendary saber-toothed cats, surrounds it, arranging themselves in hunting formation. 4 tons beneath a thick hide look like an ungainly mountain of flesh, but this is a dangerous illusion. One of the Smilodons, seized by hunting fever, decides to attack. It launches into the air, aiming for the throat, but in the next instant something happens that the predator had not expected. Bracing on its massive tail, Megatherium swiftly rises onto its hind legs and becomes a living tower nearly 5 meters tall, literally blocking out the sun. One lightning swipe of a paw bearing 30-centimeter claws, and the silence is torn by the sound of rending flesh. The Smilodon does not even manage to reach its target. The claws rip it open in mid-flight and fling the mangled body onto the rocks. The remaining cats freeze. Their primal instinct screams one thing: before them is not prey, but death, and the fearsome hunters begin to back away. But at this moment, from the shadow of the trees, the one who fears no one walks out unhurriedly. Arctodus has no intention of fighting an enraged sloth. It is a pragmatist. While the Smilodons retreat in shame, leaving their wounded companion lying on the ground. The bear, weighing about a ton, approaches the still living cat. In this cruel world, there is no room for pity. Today, the super predator has itself become a high-calorie lunch for the master of the plains. Arctodus tears the carcass apart easily, crushing ribs, but leaves the largest bones untouched. They have too little meat on them to be worth the effort. In the shadow of the thorny acacia trees, quite close by, she watches this scene with bated breath. Her name is Lucy, just over a meter tall, no taller than a modern child, without saber fangs, without bone armor, without 4 tons of weight. In this world of giants, she seems like accidental noise in evolution, a light snack for any predator. But it is precisely within her that the future of our planet is pulsing at this very moment. Arctodus leaves, other scavengers rush toward the remnants of the feast, and mill about helplessly, unable to break through the bone armor. Lucy's tribe is here too. One of the males desperately tries to gnaw at a joint, but only breaks his teeth, and the tribe is already ready to retreat, admitting defeat before the dead bone. But Lucy stops. Her gaze falls on a small fragment, accidentally crushed by the monstrous paw of Arctodus. Through the crack, she sees something fatty and glistening, a smell that her memory already holds. She has found such splinters after hyenas, and inside there was always hidden the most nourishing delicacy of the savanna. But how to reach it through a whole armored bone? In her mind, 2 points suddenly connect that have never been connected before. The weight of a stone underfoot and the fragility of bone. Lucy drops to her knees, picks up a river stone, heavy, cold, unremarkable, and swings. A dry, sharp crack splits the silence of the savanna. The bone shatters, exposing the golden contents within. In this moment, something more significant happens than all the battles of giants she has witnessed today. For the first time in history, a predator has lost to a tool. Lucy extracts the bone marrow and shares it with her kin. She does not yet know that this river stone in her palm is the prototype of a future sword, that this small spark of ingenuity will, millions of years later, be transformed into the tamed flame of the first campfires, and that her descendants will step out of the shadow of these acacia trees to rewrite the rules of life on Earth forever. The giants of the Neogene were perfecting their fangs, while Lucy had begun to perfect the world around her. The Neogene is drawing to its close. The temperature continues to fall. The great savannas that gave rise to the smilodons and giant sloths are beginning to freeze. The world of monsters stands on the edge of the abyss, and not one of those monsters yet suspects that its time is running out. Ahead lies the Pleistocene, the age of ice and mammoths, the time of the final examination in survival, when nature will stage the last stress test for all those who thought themselves invincible. And those whom this whole world of giants considered weak and insignificant will turn out to be the most dangerous creatures the Earth has ever seen. Please write in the comments what you thought of this story. It truly matters to me to know whether it reached you. Do you think Lucy made the right choice when she shared the bone marrow she'd found with her tribe, rather than keeping it for herself? And tell me, do you find it more comfortable to watch a horizontal video or a vertical one designed for a phone?